a nation known for its stunning coastlines, laid-back lifestyle, and a standard of living that ranks among the best in the world. Australia boasts one of the highest GDPs per capita, sits comfortably in global wealth rankings, and has weathered financial crises better than many advanced economies. On paper, it's a land of opportunity, a country where prosperity seems baked into the national identity. So why then, in one of the richest nations on earth, are so many Australians struggling? This is not a rhetorical question. It's a deep, unsettling paradox, one that's playing out in homes, workplaces, and communities across the country. In this story, we unpack how Australia became a nation where wealth is abundant but unevenly distributed, where the economy is growing but the average Australian is falling behind. Let's begin by facing the uncomfortable truth. Australia is rich, but Australians are not. This wasn't always the case. In fact, Australia once prided itself on being a country where the fair go wasn't just a slogan. It was a lived experience. For much of the late 20th century and early 2000s, wage growth largely kept pace with inflation, and full-time work provided not just income, but dignity, security, and the promise of a better future. The mining boom of the early 2000s created high-paying jobs, boosted national revenue, and funded generous public services. Homeownership was a realistic goal for the average worker, not a fantasy reserved for the wealthy or inherited class. But in the years following the global financial crisis, the dynamics began to shift. Economic growth continued, but it became less inclusive. Productivity rose, corporate profits soared, and asset prices, particularly housing, skyrocketed. Yet the benefits of that growth were not shared evenly. Wages stagnated while the cost of living climbed relentlessly. Union membership declined. Secure full-time jobs gave way to casual contracts, labor hire, and gig work. The economy began rewarding capital over labor, investors over workers. As a result, the so-called Australian dream has started to fracture. Today, many Australians are finding that no matter how hard they work, they're still running in place or falling behind. In the 1990s and early 2000s, Australia was seen as a rare success story, combining free market efficiency with a commitment to equity. The economy was open and competitive, but public institutions like Medicare, Centrelink, and Hex Help gave Australians a buffer against the worst excesses of capitalism. The mining boom, powered by demand from China, injected billions into the economy. Governments could afford to invest in infrastructure, services, and tax cuts all at once. Wages kept pace with productivity, social mobility was real, and the middle class grew in both size and confidence. But that golden era didn't last. Over the past 15 years, the economic model has tilted sharply toward capital and away from labor. Wealth creation is still happening, but it's increasingly concentrated in fewer hands. Growth still exists, but it's no longer shared. The ladder of opportunity hasn't disappeared, but the rungs have widened and weakened. Today, the economy isn't lifting all boats. It's lifting yachts while the rest cling to whatever floats. Nowhere is this clearer than in housing. In Sydney, median house prices are nearly 13 times the average income. In Melbourne, it's similar. Cities like Berlin and Tokyo, also global hubs, have housing markets that are far more affordable by comparison. But even beyond housing, the everyday costs of living are squeezing Australians from all sides, often to breaking point. Groceries, fuel, electricity, insurance, healthcare, childcare, everything has become more expensive, faster than wages can keep up. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, food prices rose more than 15% between 2022 and 2024, with essentials like fresh produce, dairy, and meat becoming noticeably less affordable for average households. Electricity bills have surged by over 20% in some regions, hitting families especially hard during peak seasons. Even basic services like internet and car insurance have jumped in cost. Healthcare, once a proud pillar of Australia's safety net, is also under pressure. Many Australians are now struggling to find bulk billing GPs, leading to higher out-of-pocket costs just to access basic medical care. Childcare fees in major cities are among the highest in the developed world, and aged care remains a sector plagued by chronic underfunding and staff shortages. For many working Australians, these rising costs mean making impossible choices, skipping medical appointments, delaying rent payments, rationing heating or groceries. It's not just about financial discomfort anymore. It's about survival. In one of the world's wealthiest nations, the basics of life are increasingly out of reach for millions. This erosion of purchasing power is at the heart of why so many Australians are feeling poorer, even if they're technically employed and above the poverty line. When wage growth consistently fails to keep up with the cost of living, every grocery run, every utility bill, and every childcare payment chips away at household stability. What used to be manageable expenses are now monthly stressors. For families with children, the burden is especially acute. Childcare costs in metropolitan areas can exceed $150 per day per child, leaving some parents, particularly mothers, with little financial incentive to return to work full-time. Meanwhile, bulk billing rates are plummeting across the country, meaning a simple GP visit can cost upwards of $80 out of pocket, particularly in outer suburbs and regional areas. This isn't just a short-term blip, it's a long-term structural issue. Australia's economic model is no longer delivering rising living standards for the majority. Instead, the everyday Australian is caught in a cost squeeze while watching corporate profits soar and executive salaries reach new highs. For workers, the message is clear. Work harder, earn less, and pay more, just to stay in the same place. In a country as wealthy as Australia, that equation simply doesn't add up. Debt has become the quiet engine keeping many households afloat, but at a cost that's rapidly becoming unsustainable. With Australia's household debt-to-income ratio sitting above 180%, the country ranks among the most indebted in the OECD. Much of this debt is tied up in mortgages, which once symbolized financial security but are now a major source of stress. As interest rates rose sharply between 2022 and 2024 in response to inflation, mortgage repayments ballooned. For an average $600,000 loan, monthly repayments have risen by more than $1,000, forcing families to cut back on essentials or dip further into credit. But it's not just homeowners feeling the pinch. Renters, too, are seeing costs rise while wages stagnate, many turning to credit cards or personal loans just to keep up. Meanwhile, inflation has quietly pushed up the price of school supplies, petrol, medicines, and even basic home maintenance, further stretching budgets already pulled thin. The fact that over half of those seeking help from charities like the Salvation Army are employed reveals a brutal truth. The safety net is no longer catching people before they fall. Australia is becoming a country where work no longer offers protection from poverty, and where debt, not dignity, is the buffer between survival and crisis. So how did we get here? This is the new Australian reality, generational downward mobility, where each new cohort is, for the first time in modern history, worse off than the one before. That's not just an economic shift, it's a fundamental break in the social contract. Previous generations could rely on a relatively predictable path: get an education, find stable employment, buy a home, start a family, retire with dignity. That model is now slipping out of reach. Younger Australians today face a vastly different set of conditions. University degrees are more expensive, housing is less affordable, and full-time, secure work is harder to come by. Even superannuation, the main vehicle for retirement savings, is less effective for those in casual or gig work, which disproportionately affects younger people. And while baby boomers benefited from free university, affordable housing, and rising wages, millennials and Gen Z are inheriting stagnant pay, record-high living costs, and the looming threat of climate and economic instability. They're also expected to support an aging population with fewer workers per retiree than ever before. This isn't just unfortunate, it's structurally unsustainable. A society where younger generations are poorer, more indebted, and less hopeful than their parents is not one that can thrive long-term. It breeds resentment, apathy, and social division, and it challenges the idea of Australia as a land of equal opportunity. And it's not just young people. Single parents, people with disabilities, carers, and older women are some of the fastest-growing groups experiencing poverty. Over 60% of those over the age of 55 who rent are now in rental stress. The safety nets that once protected vulnerable groups, unemployment benefits, public housing, free TAFE, have been weakened, neglected, or slowly privatized. And while the government still spends generously on welfare overall, much of it goes to retirees and high-income earners via tax concessions, superannuation subsidies, and franking credits. This creates a paradox. We spend more, but support less. This growing disconnect between productivity and wages is one of the clearest signs that Australia's economy is no longer working for the majority. For decades, the idea was simple. If workers helped grow the economy, they'd share in the rewards. But that social contract has broken. While labor productivity has risen steadily, The benefits have flowed almost entirely to shareholders and executives. Company profits are at record highs. CEO salaries have ballooned. And yet, the average worker's paycheck has barely moved. One of the key reasons is the collapse of worker power. Union membership in the private sector is now just 12%, down from over 40% in the 1980s. With less collective bargaining power, employees are left negotiating alone in an increasingly fragmented labor market. The rise of casual work, gig platforms, and labor hire firms has further eroded protections. Many are now on contracts that offer no sick leave, no paid holidays, no job security, and no clear path forward. And while the economy grows, that growth is increasingly captured by the top end of town. In 2024, the top 20% of households owned more than 60% of all wealth in Australia. The bottom 20%? Less than 1%. The so-called middle class is shrinking, not just in terms of lifestyle, but in terms of power. They have less say, less mobility, and less hope that their children will do better. And that's the real cost, not just material deprivation, but psychological erosion. More than half of Australians now say they feel financially insecure. Rates of anxiety, depression, and mental illness are climbing. Lifeline receives over 3,000 calls a day. Mental health clinics are overwhelmed. And financial stress is cited as a leading cause of relationship breakdown, homelessness, and suicide. This is what it means to struggle in a rich economy. It's not about GDP. It's not about averages. It's about who benefits and who is left behind. But here's the thing. It doesn't have to be this way. We could, but we haven't. And the reason isn't complexity. It's choice. Australia has consistently chosen policies that favor asset growth over wage growth, property investors over renters, and short-term political wins over long-term structural reform. The tools for a fairer system already exist. Reforming negative gearing and capital gains tax wouldn't just dampen speculation in the housing market. It would also unlock billions in public revenue that could be redirected to build social housing, fund healthcare, or expand education access. Raising the minimum wage and reinstating penalty rates would immediately lift incomes for hundreds of thousands of low-paid workers, especially in retail, hospitality, and care industries. These are the same workers who kept the country running through bushfires, floods, and a pandemic, yet are still struggling to pay rent. Strengthening unions, cracking down on sham contracting, and regulating gig platforms would help restore balance to a labor market tilted heavily in favor of employers. And addressing gaps in Medicare, reducing out-of-pocket health costs, and making childcare and university more affordable would ease the financial burden on families and give younger Australians a fairer start. We don't need to invent a new system. We just need to stop pretending the old one still works. We could choose fairness over favoritism, equity over extraction, people over profits. But every year we delay, the gap widens. Every budget that prioritizes tax cuts for the wealthy over services for the vulnerable locks in another generation of struggle. And the longer we wait, the harder it will be to reverse. This is the defining challenge for Australia in the 2020s, not just to grow, but to grow fairly. Not just to be rich on paper, but to ensure that every citizen feels that wealth in their lives, in their homes, in their health, and in their hope for the future. Because prosperity without inclusion is just a facade, a mirage that hides the cracks underneath. And for too many Australians, that mirage is fading fast. Thank you for watching.